Well, good evening. First of all, I would like to express my thanks and appreciation for the gracious invitation that you have accorded me and for the extraordinary effort that you have taken upon your shoulder to organize this meeting. I have wished very much to be with you in person, not through the satellite, but as you know, unfortunately, I was barred from the travel due to the restriction on my movement, even though what I am embarking upon is a process of peace, explaining our peaceful effort, avoiding catastrophe, and undergoing and implementing and executing my mission to develop friendship with the United States, to enlarge and strengthen our relation with this country. I'm going to make an introductory remarks which will bring you up to date on the current event, and then I am going to quote two conscientious American, one journalist and one honorable senator, who share the feeling that we have, that is the necessity for avoiding a catastrophe, avoiding a war. Particularly, there is no reason whatsoever for embarking upon such a conflict that nobody can predict its result or the range of its disaster for everybody. Let me begin first by making this introduction. The United States manipulation of peacemaking potential of the United Nations continues to present obstacles to a comprehensive settlement of all outstanding issues in the Middle East. While the American administration stage-managed a forceful series of rapid-fire UN resolutions regarding Iraqi restoration of its southern province, it engineered a time-delayed, toothless, mere slap on the wrist in response to the most recent highly provocative slaughter of unarmed Palestinian citizens in Al-Quds, or we call it Al-Haram al-Sharif. The U.S. administration publicly has stated that the reason for the resolutions in the first case and the attendant infusion of a massive foreign military force into an already volatile region was in line with a universal principle opposing forcible occupation of disputed territory. We see, however, that the application and the enforcement of this principle has been selectively ignored in the latter case over the course of decades and nearly 600 related United Nations resolutions. In the former case, the resolutions were drawn and passage forced in a matter of just hours. In the latter case, deliberations dragged on for 5 days and resulted in a watered-down resolution which criticized only the police and completely ignored the complicity of Israeli government. These two actions juxtaposed clearly show the bias of the American foreign policy makers. Iraq maintains that this uneven-handed response to these issues is the result of three forces which override true American interests and define the parameter of a foreign policy of the United States, as we see it, of course. The first and the most obvious force which proscribes U.S. options is that of Zionism. Zionist influence on American political decision-making and on the media has funneled the focus of American policy to a narrow range of choices in international relations, all of which enhance the Zionist historical goal of a larger or greater Israel, occupying more and more territory at the expense of the indigenous populations. The second force influencing American reaction to the current crisis is the desire of the morbid British Empire to reverse the process of setting of the sun on the remnant of its former colonial empire. Related to this second force is an Anglo-American cadre of military-industrial interest who seek to establish hegemony over Middle Eastern petroleum resources to control the economic progress of Europe and Japan, thus eliminating the competitive potential of those countries. Recognizing the limitation of the U.S. foreign policy due to these powerful forces, the Republic of Iraq has nonetheless offered, through President Saddam Hussein's peace initiative of August 12, an opportunity for the United States government to both save face and to restore the philosophy of its international relation to a more just and righteous course. In this initiative, we show that we seek peace through negotiations, not just for Iraq, but for all our brothers throughout the Arab and Muslim world. We agree to a collective, not selective implementation of all relevant United Nations resolutions. We welcome the attempt by President Mitterrand of France and other reasonable peacemaking arbiters in their striving for comprehensive and just solutions. We share with all humanity the desire for a world free from injustice of war. However, we retain a resolute certitude that the Zionist colonial imperialist forces who seek an Armageddon to test their toys of mass destruction will share the burden of carnage should they begin their dangerous game. The warmonger who slander Iraq with propaganda about make-believe atrocities in a kind of pep rally to build enthusiasm for the big game will have to dispose of the ashes of the bonfire built from human bodies. The Arab and Islamic world will not countenance an attack against their brothers launched by foreign armies from an Arab Islamic base from Holy Land to continue the oppression by forces who have long conspired against us. We remain firm in our resolve to seek peaceful means to effect a comprehensive solution to our region disputes to the benefit of all mankind. As to the question of the claimed atrocities supposedly committed by Iraq in Kuwait, I like to say the following. A spate of stories has appeared recently in the media regarding alleged maltreatment of citizens by the Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait City and throughout the province. Most of these news reports were drawn from testimony presented before the Honorable Congressman Tom Lantos, Committee on Human Rights. We were taken aback by the widely reported stories of flagrant and rampant disregard of human rights which these reports asserted were committed by our servicemen. While we acknowledge that in any conflict which involves the use of force, there are likely to be isolated incidents in which individuals misinterpret their mission and display inhumanity, we categorically deny that such incidents, if they occurred, represent any official policy of any level of our government. Moreover, we dismiss any suggestion that there have been widespread such incidents. It appears that the media, hungry for lurid and sensational stories, pounced on these hearings to expand their audience without examining the reasons why the hearings were conducted, the veracity of the witnesses, or the lack of completeness of the testimony. At least one American eyewitness in Kuwait during the period in question, whose name is Dr. Saeed, offered and was refused the opportunity to testify before the committee. The observation of this medical doctor refute much of what is alleged and is contained in an available statement which was mailed to the chairman Lantos. It is the policy of the Republic of Iraq to observe basic human rights. Anyone who is found to have committed any such act would be dealt according to our laws. Now I'd like to share with you, and I will quote one conscientious journalist which attracted me and kindled the hope in our heart that in America, the grassroots Americans, they also love peace, and they wanted to avoid unnecessary, uncalled for war that nobody knows the end of it. And this article appeared in the Dallas Times Herald on October 2nd. The author of this article, or the journalist's name, is Charlie Reese. The title of the article, and I quote him, and I'll continue to quote him, "And don't call me a conservative anymore." And he started this article in the following way, and I quote, "What intrigued me most about Iraq-Kuwait crisis is how it has exposed such extremely pathological and flawed thinking in the United States among both conservatives and liberals. It would appear that all an American president has to do is to rattle the military saber, and a majority of the population immediately puts its collective brain into a safety deposit box, as well as its morality and its conscience. Several prominent conservatives, among them Reed Irvine of the Accuracy in the Media, have actually advocated using nuclear weapon against Iraq. As a colleague, Joseph Sobran, so correctly put it, that is advocating mass murder of innocent civilians. What have the Iraqi children ever done to American conservatives that they deserve to be incinerated, horribly mummied, and poisoned with radiation? Are you afraid of children? Do you hate people just because you don't know them? I am sorry anybody ever called me a conservative. Don't do it anymore. I don't wish to be associated with people who think the price of oil is worth mass murder of children. I don't want to be associated with anyone who is so weak-brained as to be so easily manipulated into joining a lynch mob. Anything with Reed Irvine or Accuracy in the Media name on it will henceforth go straight into the trash unopened. If you want to see pathological thinking, take the example of the hostages. George Bush and Margaret Thatcher and a whole crowd of journalists are calling Saddam Hussein barbaric for holding these foreign nationals. But wait a minute. Think this through. We have blockaded his country and are massing a huge invasion force on its border, threatening quite clearly to bomb Iraq. He is holding these people in an effort to prevent us from raining fire and destruction down on his civilians. So what the Bush and the Thatcher crowd are really saying is that Saddam Hussein is barbaric because he is making it inconvenient for us to kill thousands of innocent Iraqi civilians. Frankly, Hussein deserves credit, which I notice no one has given him, for releasing the foreign women and children. After all, Bush is not pledging to spare Iraqi women and children from death, wounds, and other horrors of war. Furthermore, Hussein has said that if the United States will publicly pledge not to attack Iraq, he will release the men. Bush won't do that. The hostages are Bush's, not Hussein's. And he continues, we are in the wrong in this matter, and no amount of flag-wavering emotionalism, one-sided reporting, and sophistry can erase that fact. We have no business threatening Iraq with war. We have no business injecting ourselves into a quarrel between two foreign nations which does not threaten us or any of our vital interests. We have no business blocking a country with the intent of depriving civilians of food and medicine. We have never done that in the past, in the post-war era. We should not be doing it now. that is depriving the children food and medicine is barbaric. Threatening them with death because their ruler displaced another unelected ruler who has investment in the United States is barbaric. Having read all the warmongering that is being written by conservative and liberals, I am angry and disgusted. We have, and then he concluded his remark, of course this is his, not mine. I quote again, we have got a bunch of egoistical racists with double-digit IQs in Washington who are taking this country straight toward disaster. And the final quotation I would like to quote you before I am ready to answer all your questions, and you should be free to ask any question, is a statement by the Honorable Senator from North Carolina, Senator Terry Sanford. And I'll quote his statement. This was issued on August 21st. Quote, "We have accomplished our mission of stopping Iraq drive to take over Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East." Of course, I am going to comment on this before I will answer your question, the threat to Saudi Arabia. We should begin to reduce our forces in Saudi Arabia, ever so slowly, and look to a more multinational force to keep the peace. We should not add troops and planes. The more we build up, the more it makes everyone uneasy, and if we continue to be belligerent, we may well aggravate the situation. Enforcing sanctions against Iraq as a penalty for taking over Kuwait is a United Nations responsibility. Iraq did not violate U.S. rights particularly, and it is not up to us to rectify their wrongdoings. Except that we are part of the United Nations, we have no interest in Kuwait worth the life of a single serviceman. Certainly, I would not risk a single life to restore the Kuwait royal family to the throne. This must be a United Nations project to rectify Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. And he continues, American and other foreign families in Iraq are extremely important. The president and his advisor may have exposed them to a greater danger when they exhibited all the bluster about forcing Iraq to retreat from Kuwait. Seizing foreign national is about the only defense Saddam Hussein has to discourage invasion, which the U.S. buildup gives him reason to fear. It is essential that we insist that the United Nations handle the matter of these foreign nationals detained in Iraq. We will only make a solution more difficult if we turn this into an American vis-a-vis Iraq dispute. We turn this as an American versus Iraq dispute. We learned that in Iran. This is a problem best solved by United Nations initiative, and the oil embargo is the best way to resolve it. And finally, he concludes, an embargo of Iraq should not include food supplies. This is not in keeping with the human practices of the civilized society. Cutting off cutting off the income of Iraq would receive from that he would receive from the sale of the oil will be quite adequate to resolve this matter. It is especially sensitive to the military I am especially sensitive to the military casualties and the potential for loss of life because so many of the military families are stationed in North Carolina. And he continued, he said in his final, war in the Middle East is not necessary. I would like to just make a comment on the Honorable Senator. He said that we threatened Saudi Arabia just before we open the questions. You see, the question of Kuwait is entirely different than the question of Saudi Arabia. Kuwait was bent upon destroying our economy. And throughout the negotiation, mediation, emissaries that were sent them back and forth, they were not ready to address our serious grievances, which I will address, if you would like to, in the question period. And historically, Kuwait was part of Iraq, which I will explain also, if you wish so, in the question period. But we have neither immediate problem with Saudi Arabia, nor we have any historical claim with Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, we were surprised that suddenly we learned that we are threatening to invade Saudi Arabia. We have had excellent relations with Saudi Arabia. We had non-aggression pact with Saudi Arabia. We used to coordinate our oil policy with Saudi Arabia. They were unhappy with the behavior of the Kuwaiti. This is established. You can verify it in the OPEC documents. And so if we have harbored any desire or design to invade Saudi Arabia, we could have done it on the 2nd of August when we were forced to take military action against Kuwait because there was no American soldier until the 8th of August. We could have gone right through. This is the irony of the situation that we are facing today. We haven't taken anything American. We haven't touched any American strategic interest. On the contrary, we wanted to have good relation with the United States. I came to this country about a year and 3 weeks ago, to be exact, to broaden our relation with the United States, to have more American corporation working in Iraq, to have more trade with the United States, to have more cultural relation with the United States. But unfortunately, all I'm facing now, trying to speak peace, to speak of reason, to have a just resolution for all the problem of the area. And I should hope, and I do hope when I see all of these quotations from conscientious Americans, that finally the call of reason will have the victory over those who wanted war and clamoring for war. And you know who is clamoring for war in this country, which I mentioned, is definitely, it is not in the United States' interest to have war and to attack Iraq from the Holy Land, because you are going, if you do that, you are going to create enemies from the grassroots of Arabs and the Muslim countries, because an attack from a holy land, from the sacred land, on a Muslim country, you will create an animosity that will be lingering for decades to come. And it is neither in our interest nor in the United States' interest. All we ask for is to have justice, and even-handed justice. One principle, one standard, not double standard. If we wanted to respect Security Council resolution, one has to apply all and implement all Security Council resolution in the area using the same criteria and using the same force. But certainly we will not accept one-sided implementation on our head with all of these sanctions, with all of this cutting of food and medicine, that I know that it is contrary to the American humanitarianism to cut food and medicine from our people and children. Having said that, I would like to thank the Board of Trustees, the Chairman, and the President for giving me this opportunity to speak with you in an effort that we will have better understanding in order to achieve a peaceful solution to the most dangerous situation ever after World War II. Thank you very much. Now I am ready to respond to your questions. Yes.
Mr. Ambassador.
Yes, sir.
We thank you very much for your presentation, of course, and we certainly share your interest in pursuing your original intentions of a pursuit of better relations with the United States, and we certainly also wish a period of peace to be found. The issue, however, certainly is the question of a just resolution. For the benefit of our people here, they may get cards on which they can write questions from the ushers in the audience. But here's your first question, Mr. Ambassador.
Yes, sir.
You talk about your respect for human rights. How do you believe the Kurdish population of Iraq would feel about your comment after your government is alleged to have killed 5,000 of their population with poison gas a few short years ago?
Well, this is one of the smear campaign leveled against Iraq, and nobody bother to do some homework to dig in depth to find the truth. Let me explain a little bit in detail. First of all, the fact or the claim that we used chemical weapon against our people, it's a claim fabricated against Iraq with no single proof, not a single victim. Nobody can present a single victim that we have used chemical weapon against our own people. There is a confusion between, this is intended confusion, to depict the pictures of some Kurds were killed in a small town, Iraqi town called Halabja, which you see it left and right on television. This picture was taken during the war between Iraq and Iran. This claimed that we have killed 5,000 people in Halabja. But many journalists, biased one, through the Israeli lobby in this country and public relations, trying to show that we have killed the Kurds by using poison gas after the war, after ceasefire. Now, after ceasefire, we have taken military action to wipe out the source of terrorism of a handful of terrorists who used to come across the border from Iran, who helped the Iranian forces in occupying part of Iraq, who wreaked havoc in the north of Iraq. Those handful of terrorists are the tribal group of Barazani, which was used first by the British, then even the CIA and the Americans supported them, and then the Israelis and the Shah supported them, only in Iraq. Whereas in Iraq is the only country that gave the Kurds their complete autonomy, administrative, educational, political, judicial, in the north of Iraq, whereas the Kurds in Iran, the Kurds in Iraq, they are less than 3 million. The Kurds in Iran, they are about 6 million. In Turkey, about 10 million. You don't hear anything about the plight of the Kurds. There they have no rights whatsoever. But Iraq, after solve this problem, we have solved the Kurdish problem since 1974 by giving them all of this autonomy. So what happened is that this is part and parcel of the campaign to smear Iraq. Even in Halabja, which you see this picture of civilian Kurds on the streets, even that, the Pentagon had information which was published by one of the journalists in Washington Post. It says that even in Halabja, there were not 5,000 people killed. There were 100 to 200 people killed. And they were killed by the Iranian, not by the Iraqis, because they were killed by cyanide. During the war, chemical weapon was used. I am not denying this, but it was used on our own territory after the Iranian used it first. And this is established by the United Nations. But to claim that we have used chemical weapon against our own people after ceasefire, this is a big lie, I'm sorry to say, that nobody ever could produce one victim. And so we are proud that we have solved the Kurdish problem once and for all. Now, I am not saying, if you are going to speak about a human right, that some human right violation did not take place. Some it did during the war. That's true. But that was not the policy of the government. Some security police, they sidestepped their authority and committed human rights violation during the war between Iraq and Iran. And we are not the only country that committed a human rights violation during an emergency situation when the very existence of the country was at stake. I don't want to remind you that even in the United States, during the Second World War, you have committed also a human rights violation by encamping American of Japanese origin. This is an emergency situation, and it does happen, and I'm not saying that some human rights violations were not committed in Iraq during emergency situation. But nobody is giving any thought that we have undergone a policy of liberalization, of democratization. We have started to initiate a new constitution by which we'll have multi-party system and new press laws in order to have a new opening, new liberalization of the country after the war. Even the new project of our constitution state that the president should be elected by universal suffrage. And we were supposed to put that constitution into referendum, into publicity, before the end of this year. But now with this new emergency situation created on our head by the threat of American attack,
Mr. Ambassador,
I am afraid that we are going to delay that, and we hope that before the end of the year, this emergency situation will be dissolved and we'll have the new constitution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We'll try to keep our remaining questions as brief as we can.
Okay.
We only have about 8 minutes to go, but let me read one question, which is just a little longer than the next one will be. As you know, Mr. Ambassador, it's a matter of great distress and concern to many Americans that a significant number of their fellow countrymen are unable to leave Iraq and Kuwait at this time. This situation, even more than the invasion of Kuwait by your forces, has angered the American people and aggravated relations between the two countries. It's been reported that one of our neighbors, Mr. Sergio Ado of Baltimore County, is in need of medical attention in Kuwait. He serves as an example of the condition of others. The question that is asked by one member of the council this evening is, will your government, as a humanitarian gesture, permit people like Mr. Ado to go home at this time?
Well, I have answered this question in my presentation because I thought this will come up, and I would like to inform you we are barring them, foreigners and particularly those countries which have forces aligned against us from travel. It was only after all of these forces came and the threat of attacking Iraq came into being. We have asked only the United States government and President Bush to give us assurance that they will not attack Iraq. We will let everybody go. But you see, everybody is forgetting for humanitarian reasons. We have let all women and children out. We are letting the sick people. And definitely now on their way, there are 14 Americans now on their way. And we are working wherever we find sick people or old people and they are in need of medical attention that we cannot provide, we will let them go. But let us work for peace. Let us work to remove the threat of attacking us, as I explained to you, as Mr. Rees in his article explained to you. And this is the only way to solve this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Several members would like you to reiterate those grievances which Iraq has had against Kuwait,
right,
which encouraged Iraq to invade and conquer Kuwait.
Yes. Well, we have immediate reasons and we have historical claims, both. The immediate reasons, right after ceasefire in the war between Iraq and Iran, the Kuwaitis definitely stopped aiding us. Okay, this is their right. They were aiding us by lending money to us during the war because we not only defended ourselves, we defended Kuwait and other Arab states of the Gulf. they began something was very fishy from the beginning of the ceasefire. They began to overproduce without any necessity or need for them. You know, they are not more than 200,000 indigenous Kuwaitis who have all the privileges in Kuwait. And they have 400 billion, this is established, 400 billion investment abroad. It gives them more revenue than all the production of oil. Why they were overproducing, violating OPEC quota to drop oil prices. Well, the oil prices was a reasonable price for everybody, for the consumer and for the producer, $18 per barrel. So they were bent on hurting Iraq economy. They were destroying our economy because we need every dollar. We came out of the war. We have heavy debt. We have our development plan, and we have to reconstruct the ravages of war. And when they kept on doing this, we reached a point that we could not even service our debt. Just to give you an example, for every dollar drop below the $18, the benchmark of oil then, it will cost us $1 billion a year. So when it reached $11, we lost for 1 year $7 billion. This is one. Secondly, during the war, the second grievances, they have encroached on our border because, you see, the border is not delimited. It's not delineated. And they moved about 70 kilometers into our land, and then they built oil well in a slant form in order to siphon our rich oil fields south of Iraq. This is an established fact, and so we try to discourage them. They did that while we were busy fighting war with Iran, because they built it and encroached on our field in 1980. Exactly right after the war with Iran started in September 1980. And so this is the second grievance. We ask them to rectify the situation, to delineate the border, and then to pay us back what they have stolen of our oil. Thirdly, we have asked them that we cannot stay landlocked. We wanted an access to the Gulf. Even we have asked them to lease 2 islands in order to have an access to the Gulf. These are the major grievances that we have with them. Plus we consider historically Kuwait for centuries was part of Iraq under the Ottoman rule, and it was a British army officer during World War I that severed that part from Iraq, because from the Ottoman Empire, because it was Kuwait run by the governor of Basra, which is the big city south of Iraq, until that time. And then when we gained independence, all of the government were always asking the British, and you can find the document, they should restore Kuwait to Iraq. Until 1958, the last government of the monarchy asked the British government, and the British government agreed in principle to restore Kuwait to Iraq, because at that time we were under the British rule indirectly, because we were part and parcel of a defense pact called Baghdad Pact. So the British were sure that they are controlling Iraq, and so when the last government of the monarchy by Mr. Nur Said asked the British, they agreed in July that they are going to implement or return Kuwait to Iraq, but then there was a revolt in 14th of July 1958, by which the old monarchy was turned over to a republic. And then the British retreated from their promise. Until 1961, when the Prime Minister decided to annex Kuwait to Iraq, it was the British that gave independence to Kuwait and brought British forces to protect that independence. That's the story of Kuwait.
Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you another question quickly. It's been recently reported that an agreement was reached between President Saddam Hussein, and the PLO chairman Yasser Arafat, which would result in Palestinian refugees being resettled between the Tigris and Euphrates. Is this true, and when is it scheduled to begin?
Well, I have no such information, nor I have heard it. I'm sorry to say that.
Another question, Mr. Ambassador, is are there any borders, in addition to those of Iran and Kuwait, which you might think to be illegitimate?
No, I just stated we have no problem with Saudi Arabia. With Saudi Arabia, we have 1,000 kilometers of border, and we have settled it. We have non-aggression pact with them. We have no ambition on any territory of another country. You know, Iraq alone, we have the second oil reserve in the world. Iraq alone, this is the proven reserve.
I must interrupt you, Mr. Ambassador, simply to say that we thank you very much, and we're very sorry the evening has been this short.
Well, I'd like to thank
you for your answers, which have been ample.
I thank you very much, and I would like to send my greetings, and let us work together for a good relationship and for peace. Thank you.